Hello and welcome back to Automation Answers. Today I'm at the TGW head office in Market Harborough. With me is James Osborne, the Vice President of Business Development for the retail space at TGW. James, appreciate you busy. Pleasure having you on. How's things? How are you getting on?
Thanks for coming in, Isaac. It's great to have you in Market Harborough. It's I think for me this is an opportunity for us to have a good conversation about some of the hot topics that cross over both of our industries. So talking about technology and recruitment, and I'm looking forward to a good chat. Yeah.
Awesome. Good stuff. And how's things in the automation world? Any hot topics, any hot trends that you're seeing? Space optimization seems to be a very, very big topic at the moment. What are you seeing out there on the market from your customers?
So I think holistically, logistics has bounced back now after COVID. Where we saw, a lot of very rapid change, and immediately a lot of our clients invested in space during the pandemic to cope with increased capacities, typically for online. What happened immediately after that is I think they were left with kind of surplus capacity as we all started getting back to having, a life outside of our homes. And it's taken a few years really for that surplus capacity to get used through organic growth. Yeah. But we're kind of back now to kind of pre-pandemic or pandemic levels, sorry. And I think we're seeing kind of like some very interesting investments happening right across the industry. What I think is happening is generally the amount of GDP that goes through the logistics industry has been on a pretty steady rise for the last decade. So, we've seen the total number, for example, of people working in logistics in the UK has gone from about 1.1 million to 1.6 million just in the last 10 years. And that is despite huge investments in technology. So the industry itself is growing very rapidly. We're seeing a lot of people coming up through dedicated courses, lots of dedicated logistics university programs, and that is really helping the industry to thrive and prepare us for the next 10 years. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's an interesting point that always comes up in the automation, robotics, humanoid space, that it's going to completely take over and people will be obsolete and not needed. But I think that's an interesting point you mentioned there, that that's not the case. So exciting things to come, which I think is good. Before we move on, obviously that'll be a common theme throughout the podcast about robotics, automation, AI. Would you mind, just for those that don't know you, you've been in the industry for a long time, but anyone that isn't aware of you, would you mind just taking us back to your background? Obviously you worked on the other side of the fence, being the customer, and now you're obviously working for the integrator with TGW. So do you mind giving us a talk through your journey?
Sure. So I've had maybe a background of about 20 years working for retailers in the UK. So initially Asda and then Tesco's and then Sainsbury's, and most of those roles have been in a logistics capacity or a commercial strategy space. And most of that has been trying to understand how we can apply technology to the supply chain, whether that be software or automation, really trying to find efficiencies, but also to kind of support growth and profitability for those retailers. Now, on the other side of the fence, I am working with retailers globally, trying to help them put together business cases for investment in technology that's going to support their growth and their profitability. So we'll work with retailers right across North America, across Europe, and really my background is focused particularly in e-commerce and online. So if they've got a rapid growing e-commerce business, then that's where I would step in.
Awesome, good to know. And do you see in your space and what you're doing at the moment, I know we've just touched on sort of hot topics and space optimization and the demand and the increase that's come from COVID. Do you see any particular trends in terms of technologies or in terms of solutions that you guys are coming across a lot in the markets?
Yeah, well, I think if we try and think about the market macro in terms of kind of cash and people and what's moving, I think in logistics over the last 10 years, there's been two big shifts. We've seen the growth in online, and that's taken physical activity away from stores and it's put it into warehouses. So as e-commerce has grown as a percentage of total retail, we've seen a shift in population from retail stores into warehousing. So that's kind of that's point number one. And I think point number two is 3PL and logistics services generally has become much more accessible, certainly to small and medium tier retailers. Now, these are retailers that historically might have operated their own warehousing space, perhaps in the back of their retail unit. And what they're doing now is they're now much more readily able to outsource those to either a multi-user facility or a dedicated 3PL that can do a more cost-effective job for them and meet their logistics needs. So those two trends combined has kind of, I think, contributed to the large increase in logistics services. The number of people working in logistics, as we just said, has actually increased. So despite the amount of automation that's invested, the automation investments are still predominantly from the larger businesses. The majority of use cases in smaller retailers is niche, so it would be a value added service. So typically, if it's a small to medium sized retailer, the logistics technology that they will predominantly be investing in will be software orientated, usually focused on either management or reduction in waste or errors. As they get a bit bigger, then that's when we start to see investments in technology to support picking and order management. So out of the 1.8 million people that work in logistics, approximately 50% are dedicated to order management. So that's the percentage of people that are working on picking orders in a warehouse, both through automated systems and manual systems. And it's those larger facilities where we see the business cases really stand out for investment in picking technology.
Excellent. And what you mentioned picking technologies there. What technologies do you see from a pick and piece or from an AI, even AGVs and AMR solutions? Do you see anything that's standing out on the market at TGW offering? Anything to meet the customer requirements from that side of things?
Well, I think this is the bit where we have a crossover in terms of our interests, Isaac, because the human element of those warehouses is evolving very quickly. There's two things going on there as well. The first is that, the general role of a warehouse operator is becoming more technically advanced. We're needing them to cover, more technologies, more roles than historically they would have. It used to be driving a picking truck or driving a forklift. Now it's operating many different types of technology. So that complexity is actually really, really key. But then seasonality is also key. So as these retailers' online percentage is increasing, so is the shortening of the supply chain is creating spikes in demand. So this is an area you'll know very well, but kind of seasonal labour, it's not unusual for a retailer for Black Friday in their busiest warehouse to see, a need for 300 to 400% their typical demand. Now, the way in which they would manage that is either through recruiting lots of short-term labour or by extending the delivery promise. The delivery promise being extended is always a route to customer disappointment because, they're going to get frustrated having to wait to, what might have been 48 hours waiting 1 or 2 weeks for the delivery. So we're seeing all of that human complexity going on. When you overlay technology on top of that, what we're finding is that technology which can support that flexibility is the number one in terms of payback. Now, it isn't necessarily the case that there's a one solution fits all in terms of a big automated answer for that. What we always try and advocate for is kind of a progressive journey that is flexible enough to cope with all of that seasonality. And the people element is kind of the icing on the cake.
Of course.
So as you've got your seasonality, we see that volatility is generally managed through people. So in answer to your question, that's the...
Yeah, no, I think you raised some really interesting points. And I think, obviously going back to our role and our part within the intralogistics and logistics world, I think you hit the nail on the head and you highlighted those points. So I don't know, maybe even if you go 5 years back, 10 years back, definitely. So the role of operators or warehouse operations, it's more manual, it's driving forklifts, maybe you're unblocking conveyor systems at the very most, but now obviously you're walking around, there's AI, there's technology, you're looking at SCADA systems, and you've got to be a lot more tech savvy, I think, for a better phrase, than we were 5 years ago, which plays an interesting part within the space, both for myself and you guys, and how we navigate that. So
yeah, lots of our clients, when they're looking for, even a warehouse management role now, it is in the scope to be thinking about how are they going to deal with problems in the automation. So when automation is introduced, the historical model is you would have a service team, or you would have an on-call engineer, and that typically was a good value for money solution for retailers historically. But again, with the online element, that downtime that you're now experiencing, if something goes wrong, waiting for your engineer to get there, that's going to lead to customer order failure and disappointment. So what we are finding is that there's a real appetite, I think, from a recruitment perspective, to have not just operators multi-skilled, but management multi-skilled now, and for them to have a much broader understanding. A lot of the time, when there is an issue with automation, it's either the software, it's either the hardware, but mostly it's the product itself that's caused some kind of issue. And a lot of those resolutions can be managed by a shift manager or a team leader. So having that extra capability there is really important, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So, and we mentioned, so just going on from that, the different types of technologies and the way the world is rapidly advancing. Do you foresee there an issue where a customer might be a bit blindsided, not really understanding what different types of technology to invest in? They kind of cherry pick and say, hey, I want this, I want that, and try and bring it all together. And then maybe the technology not being cross-compatible. Is that something you come across a lot in the space? Is that an issue? Is it not an issue? I'm not sure where you stand on that.
There are risks whenever you introduce multiple technologies into the same facility as to how that integration takes place and who takes accountability for it. And I think there's quite a few case studies in the UK, particularly, where that hasn't worked so well. What I think is key to trying to prevent issues in that space is having the right philosophy when you undertake those projects with the existing workforce. So we have a number of clients who've gone from a completely manual warehouse to a fully automated one. Their colleagues go with them on the journey to understand the technology as it's being installed. Now, as they go through that journey, keeping those people in the business is absolutely crucial. Those people that have come with you on the journey. So my advice in terms of heading off that risk would be to try and identify key stakeholders at the start of the journey and try and really focus on retaining that knowledge, certainly for the first 3 to 5 years post-project, because they're the ones that are going to deal with issues should they arise. Those issues that we're talking about of integration exist because the corporate legacy isn't there to really understand what's caused those issues. So that's how I would deal with that risk.
Good to know. And moving on to a second point, you obviously were talking about the efficiency, the cost reduction, especially not necessarily much in retail, but definitely in the grocery side of things in the automation world. Very, very low margin, very, very high volume. Automation can be expensive. That's the facts, I guess. How do you get around that?
The construction of the business case is it's how to broaden your scope as much as possible is the key to making that a success. And so an example in the grocery space would be as if we're investing in automation to service an online grocery order. How are we going to make it busy all of the time? That's really the question that you've got to ask yourself. Now, there's lots of different ways that we can expand kind of the typical application for automation to include bolt-on activities that are going to make that business case really attractive. An example would be returns. So if you can use the automation that you used to pick the order to also deal with failed orders, which will come back from customer deliveries where the customer wasn't home, or the level of rejections on that order was particularly high for whatever reason. If they go back to a store, typically the labour to de-pick and put all of that stock back is really, really high. If we can de-pick that using the automation in a quiet time when nobody wants their groceries delivery, then that's a very lucrative part of the business case. It might be that if it's a business that has smaller convenience stores using the online grocery automation to pick maybe high value split case items and send those to a convenience store, again, at quiet times of the day when people don't want grocery orders being delivered. That's an example as to how we might make the machine busy all of the time. And that's really the goal in the business case is how can we make this machine busy as much of the week as possible.
Brilliant. And so question, we kind of touched on it before, AutoStore are really taking the industry by storm. I think that's fair to say. How do you personally deal with that? How do you compete with that? And what's the future looking like in the next 5 to 10 years?
So the AutoStore model is a kind of a 3D storage solution that has some real benefits for the end user. It's a system that typically is very rapid to install. We know that it's got a very dense storage array, so the boxes are all quite close together. And we know that for clients who have a particular range where the demand is predictable on a daily basis, that actually this solution works really well. And I say to anybody, if your business meets this list of criteria, you should buy an AutoStore. We know pretty well whether their business is going to be a good fit for that technology or not. When you start to step outside of those fixed parameters, however, and let's be honest, the world is a very volatile place at the minute. When you step outside of that predictability, what you really want to try and achieve is maximum amount of flexibility. And so that's where the technologies start to come into play. You've got a very real risk in terms of productivity if you design a system to a fixed range in the first place. And if that range changes because your business model changes, you've got to have certainty that the technology that you're investing in is going to last for 10, 15 years. So range and flexibility is one area where I think alternative technologies really come into their own. And the other is just physical space. So with any type of 3D technology where you're digging to get to product, actually you need to be able to service the equipment on the top. So typically, the sprinklers or there's a maintenance access at the top. It can just be that physically the building is not suitable for that type of technology. And other types of technology, especially when the building is higher, other types of technologies are a better use of that physical space. And the cubic use of the building is so important, because we can either design a smaller building that will do the same throughput and therefore reduce rents and rates, or we can extend the life of the network. And those two elements, if you can bake those into your business case, they can actually drive you down alternative technologies to the 3D technologies like AutoStore. So typically they're the key arguments for kind of storage, 3D storage versus kind of a shuttle.
Excellent. And going back to our previous point where we mentioned about the role of the human in an ever-evolving automation and technological world, how would you recommend we upskill the next generation, people that might be in college, universities, so that we are ready for the next latest humanoids, AutoStores, etc., AGVs, AMRs that we're seeing on the markets?
Yeah, that is the question, isn't it? And I think there's almost a merger of courses and industries that needs to take place to achieve that, Isaac. So you've got kind of traditional mechanical engineering and electrical engineering courses, which are great feeders for the types of industry that we're in, so this automated industry. But actually, there is relatively little crossover, I think, with traditional logistics courses. So there are a number of really great colleges and universities that do logistics courses and degrees. But again, the content in there in terms of mechanical engineering is actually still really limited. And I think what the future needs to bring somehow is an overlap. There needs to be some kind of synergy between these two areas, because really the manager of an automated warehouse in the future needs to have that really good grounding in terms of logistics and routing and transport, but they also really have to have a much smarter comprehension of what it means to have a big machine working for them 24/7. And that I think is the bit that needs developing the most. We're seeing in a number of areas as well good development in terms of starting younger. So I think, when was at secondary school, nobody put their hand up and said, I want to work in logistics when I'm older.
Yeah.
It was not a thing at all. And I think now starting, whether that's through dedicated kind of trade fairs for children, or through kind of visits from corporations. Wincanton and DHL both do a hell of a lot in the secondary school space.
Yeah.
That part of the market I think is absolutely key, because then when they make the decisions in terms of college and university, it's the thought as to that career choice has already been put in their head. So I think there's work in those two areas.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think there's probably quite a big play. I think what gets a lot of traction, a lot of activity is the humanoid space as well, because that's really exciting, and it's kind of going against the normal human ethos. There's another version of me that might be competing against me. So I think we could do a lot more to play alongside that. Obviously Tesla, Figure AI, etc., that are doing work. Apptronic is another one. I think it kind of feeds into the whole marketing piece. I think I might have mentioned before, I'm relatively new into the industry. I started 7 years ago. When I first started, I had no idea when I was clicking buy online or on Amazon that all of this was going on behind the scenes. And I think I saw a few Christmas adverts for Amazon that were advertising, and they do a little pan around the warehouse. So you're starting to see a lot more just in general day-to-day TV advertisement on LinkedIn, Facebook, what's going on behind the scenes. But I think feeding that in from a marketing point of view to not only the current generation, but the up and coming generation is really vital. So then, like you mentioned, when it triggers in your mind to go, oh, hey, that's actually quite exciting. I might want to get involved in that. So I think it all plays in from a marketing point of view and what you mentioned to getting that next generation into the world.
Amazon's a great example for what we've just been talking about as well, because they recognise this gap between mechanical engineering and logistics as well. And so you've probably seen some of their adverts in terms of you can apply for a role to work as warehouse operative in Amazon, and then subject to meeting their criteria, you can actually branch out into, for example, an electrical engineering role with Amazon. So they're recognising that gap as well, and they're trying to fill it themselves, which I think is a really good initiative. In terms of AI, we were touching on a bit about AI. Do you want to talk about AI?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and I'll say from a recruitment point of view, then I'll let you chip in on how you see it. I was actually speaking to a leader from the industry, and he said I had my resume scanned by AI, and it came back saying it was actually really poor. And it was a very interesting conversation that I had with him. AI from a recruitment point of view it's there. It's very, very prominent. Same as what I said to you before, I don't think it's ever going to take over. I don't think AI or robotics will ever take over. There's still a human element. But especially you mentioned seasonal volumes, large recruitment, in a retail warehouse, if you need to hire 300-400% more than usual, it can't just be done by me sat there looking through CVs. That's impossible. So the use of AI is absolutely, it's there, and it's really, really important. However, I think the more senior you maybe get in executive recruitment, you need that human, you need that personal touch that can look through the CVs and go, okay, they've worked on this project. This was the value. This was the technology they've implemented. And you probably could get that from AI in the future, and the use of ChatGPT, etc. But I don't think it's there right now, personally. But the use of AI in getting some of the younger individuals or the current workforce up to speed with different technologies, I think is really cool. So, if you put on a headset and you can see a virtual warehouse shop floor and the different technologies moving around, I think that's a really good way of introducing the current and future generations into this type of technology.
Yeah, I was fascinated. I think, we could definitely do that better using AI, maybe in terms of kind of understand, certainly from a training perspective, so understanding people's weaknesses and kind of we do work with digital twinning quite a bit. So digital twinning, for anybody that doesn't know what that is, this is where we create a real life digital replica of real life, and we'll run them simultaneously. And so when events occur in the system in real life, they're mirrored in the digital system, and we can analyse them historically and try and understand, take them apart, put them back together and try and understand why they happened in a safe space, rather than, because we've then lost the opportunity to do anything with it in the real life space. Now, with AI, what we can also do is, I think, some of the applications are truly amazing. So it's fantastic at spotting errors. So it was explained to me by a professor at MIT how AI actually thinks, and we're trying to explain that on this podcast is probably not a wise thing to do, but essentially what we're talking is numbers and data, and if you imagine those pictures that you had when you were a kid and you stared at them long enough and you could see the Mona Lisa, what AI is able to do is see the Mona Lisa instantly because of how it analyzes the picture. Now, when you take 1,000 mixed parcels on a conveyor belt, what AI is instantly able to do that human isn't, is to be able to identify errors even before they occur, but problems with returns, problems with error generation, problems with labeling. It's able to process all of this data at a much higher speed than anything that we've had historically. And so what we're able to do is we're able to spot more problems before they occur, and we're able to identify processes that might be causing problems further upstream. So all of that combined means that I think AI really complements people in a warehouse environment. And that is, for me, the number one area that I'm interested in, is how can we use it to really reduce those errors.
Yeah, definitely. So, and do you see there being a problem with us being too reliant on AI at any point? Could it become a hindrance to us rather than a benefit?
I think there is zero risk based on the data that we've seen over the last 10 years that AI is ever going to replace the need for people in a warehousing environment. The data doesn't support that. It isn't necessarily the same in all industries, but we're still seeing this explosion in logistics as a service, like I was saying at the start of the conversation, moving from 1.1 to 1.8, despite the investments in technology. 1.8 million people working in logistics is phenomenal growth. It's about 60% over 10 years. So I don't think there is a real risk that we're going to see large reduction in roles anytime soon in the logistics industry. What I do see AI doing, though, is taking away the frustration and the boredom that can set in when your tasks are very repetitive. We need people to do what they're good at, and we need computers to do what they're good at. People, carbon life forms with noodly fingers, are very, very flexible. We can physically move from one activity to another instantly with a little bit of training. Machinery can't do that very well. And equally, like I was just describing, computers can spot errors before they even exist, before we even knew that they existed. So, we need to find ways to use technology to get maximum payback, and people the same. And if we can then, use technology to create gamification and make life more interesting for people in the warehousing space, then it's a win-win as far as I can see.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, that concludes the episode. So thank you so much, James. Appreciate you're really busy. It was great to have an industry chat. Thanks for listening, / watching, and I'll come to you very soon with a next episode. Thanks very much, James.
Okay, pleasure. Thank you.
Cheers.